Hi, everybody. What I want to talk about today is how do you know when you need to make a change in who's running your enablement team? When do you have to replace the person who's in charge of enablement? It's a tricky thing. And I want to talk about some things you might want to keep in mind as you're trying to evaluate, do I keep them and coach them, or do I make a change? Let me first give this disclaimer. Enablement's a tricky thing for you as a CRO to run if you've never done it before. And I will tell you candidly, a lot of CROs struggle with running enablement, and not because enablement team is bad, it's because they haven't learned how to run the team yet. And so what I'll say is, think hard about, are you giving them the proper coaching and funding and all the support that they need to do their job well? And if that's happening and things are still not working well, that's what we're talking about here today. So let's just assume that you're nurturing them and growing them and funding them all in a proper, meaningful way. But let's talk about a couple of things that to keep in mind about when to make that change. I think first and foremost, are they getting the job done? And that's a very broad blanket statement. But what I mean by that is, are they able to execute programs effectively? At a very, very basic level, are they able to execute them and get adoption and move the needle on KPIs across the organization? That is foundational to what enablement does. If they can't do that, then there's a bigger problem. So that's one thing, just can they execute programs flawlessly? Number two is, are they running it like a business? And are they able to say those programs I was just talking about a second ago, are they able to track the KPIs associated with those programs to see if it's making a meaningful difference? Because again, enablement in its own self is a business. You have to run it like a business. And that means it's got metrics on which you judge its effectiveness. And so every strong enablement leader is always looking more ruthlessly at, how can I run this like a business? What are the metrics I need to use to align to the team, the sales team, to run this more effectively? And if they're all about surveys and they're all about, people love my training, they told me that, that's not good enough. You want your enablement leader to be focused on running it like a business. And I'll also tell you this blanket statement, a lot of enablement leaders struggle with this because it's still a new thing of trying to attribute metrics to what enablement does. And so, before you say they can't do this, you want to coach them a bit, try and figure out what are the right metrics, and then coach them towards that. If they still aren't getting it, they still don't think of it that way, then there's a separate issue. Another indication of it not going right for your enablement team is there a demand for enablement? So everybody will always groan when they're told to come to a Zoom or go to a conference room for a session. That's just human nature because we're all busy. But what should happen when enablement's doing its job properly is that there's a pull for enablement towards the team. So there might be a sales manager who's saying, my team is struggling with X. Can I get some time with you to help them with that? Or a product leader says, hey, we're doing a launch in a few months. I really want to sit down and talk about how we're going to do that launch then. Or head of sales, you might be saying, we're having some problems with how we're doing discovery across the organization, or how we're mapping key accounts. We want to dive deeper on that. There should be a pull for their time. And if no one's ever asking them to do things for them, that tells you a pretty clear signal that they're not giving the organization what they need. Because if so, they'll want more of that. There's somebody I was working with a couple of years ago, and she got in the job and her remit was this big. And she did such a good job over the first 6 to 9 months. Her remit became this big, and she had all these folks asking her for more stuff, and they gave her more staff. And all of a sudden her team went from this to this within a year. And so it's because there's a big pull for what they were doing on the enablement team. That's a strong signal that you're doing it really well. The other couple of things that I think about, number one, is this person building relationships across the organization? Something you'll hear me say a lot is that enablement is a team sport, and it requires that you build relationships across the whole organization, in finance, in operations, in HR, across the sales organization. That is who we work with. There's a candidate I worked with, years ago, and she was saying that the reason she'd been so successful over her 10 years at her company was the capital that she built up across the organization. And that was how she got stuff done. And so if your enablement leader is not effectively building capital across the organization, coach them on it. But if that's not really growing and becoming part of how they work, then it might be time to make a change. And it's more important the higher up in the organization you go, right? If you're a program manager and you're delivering onboarding, once a month, it's important, but not that important. If you're running the function, those relationships are everything. And if your person's not doing that, then you might want to think about coaching them in or coaching them out. And the last thing I'll talk about that's related to some things I've been saying is, are they able to take feedback? So as you coach them on these points, are they able to hear you, not defensively, but hear you and synthesize that feedback into how they do their job? If they're learning and they're growing and they're becoming better at each quarter over quarter over quarter, you probably have a good person in place. But if those bad habits still linger, or they're not able to take the feedback you give them and operationalize that, that tells you something they may not be the right level to be the enablement leader. I hope these tips help. It's always a tricky thing to make a change, but hopefully these things will give you some things to think about as you're in your decision matrix about whether you want to keep your person and coach them or make a change. Good luck, everybody.